We just started the new chapter on Friday. So what I'd like to do is like to do the Rambam on the on these laws, and then we'll go over what we did on Friday and continue. Metz Hashem. So the Rambam in the laws of Klei Hamigdash, the vessels. Let me mute everyone. The Rambam talks about the in his laws of the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash and those that serve in the Beis Hamikdash in chapter 6. So the Rambam says it is impossible for a sacrifice of a person to be offered without him standing on top of it. And the communal offerings are the offerings of every single yid. And it's impossible that every single yid could stand in the courtyard at the time they bring the sacrifice. Therefore, the earlier prophets chose or ordained. They decided. They selected from the yidden kesherim, which means like upright, yirei chet, sin fearing, and those people would be the shluchei kol Yisrael. They would be the emissaries of all of Klal Yisrael to stand on the sacrifices. And they're called the Anshe Maimon. And they divided them into 24 groups. And similar to the groups of Kohanim and Leviim. And on every Maimon, for each group, there was a Mamuna. There was someone in charge called the Rosh HaMaimon. He was called the head of that Maimon. So what the Rambam has told us is that the people are supposed to stand on their korban, and that applies to a communal korban, which means every single yid really should be there, except that it's impossible. So the earlier prophets they decreed that we should have, and they chose the Yidden based on the certain representatives that would be, of course, they chose proper ones, upright ones that are God-fearing, and they're called the Anshe Maimon, and they stand on the Karbanis, and there are 24 groups of them, similar to the 24 groups of the Kohanim and Leviim, and there's a person called the Rosh HaMaimon, and he's sort of in charge. Now, the Rambam continues and says, in every week, the Maimon would gather together. Those that lived in Jerusalem or near it would go to the Beis Hamikdash with the Kohanim and Leviim of that week. Those that lived far from Jerusalem, that are part of that Maimon, that group. So when it comes their week, they would gather in the shul in their place. And what would they do? They would fast Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, but they would not fast on Friday because of Shabbos, and they wouldn't fast on Sunday so that they don't go from the Shabbos of Oineg to fasting. So they shouldn't have such an extreme change, which could lead to health problems. We saw a weakening and so on in the Mishnah.
What did you say that the translation of Maimon was?
Well,
is it upkeep?
I didn't really translate the word Maimon. The Ma'amadais, seemingly it's from the word standing. They would be standing, oimed, from the word oimed. So I believe that's where the word comes from. That they established Ma'amadais. They're called the Anshe Maimon because they would stand on top of the sacrifice.
Because I remember they used to collect Maimon money for the Rebbe.
In
Toronto, there was one person that was designated. He went around and asked people that were interested to give Maimon money.
I don't know if it's the same idea because this was not a fundraiser type of thing. I think that's more from the literal word Maimon, which means like, although I don't speak a great modern Hebrew, but I think Maimon would be more like upkeep. I think that would be like modern Hebrew. But I think here the concept is oimed al gabav, so they called it ma'amodes. I believe that's where it comes from. So the Rambam continues, and he says that each day of that week that they had their Maimud, they would daven 4 tefillos, Shachris, Mincha, Ne'ilah, and they would add a prayer between Shachris and Mincha. Now, this is the Rambam's view that there was like an extra prayer there that was added, and it's actually called Musaf, even though it wasn't the Musaf prayer. It was like an additional prayer. And then the Rambam talks about the Nasias Kapayim, which we spoke about, and our Mishnah started with Noisin Kapayim. The Kayanim would lift their palms, meaning they would do the blessing of the Kayanim in the Maimud 3 times a day, Shachris in the Musaf, which is this extra prayer, not the regular Musaf that we pray according to the Rambam. This is the way the Rambam learns, if you have extra prayer, and in Ne'ilah, and they would read in the Sefer Torah 3 people twice a day, Shachris, and in this extra prayer. So they would pull out the Torah twice, the morning prayer and then this extra prayer. And then, but by Mincha, they would not read it. Instead, in a Torah, they would just say it by heart, and similar to saying Shema, and individually, meaning not in public. And they would not gather for the Tfilas HaMincha. In other words, they wouldn't do these extra prayers on Erev Shabbos because they were busy with Shabbos. So then the Rambam says that they're gathering together for each of these prayers of these 4 services. Again, you had Shachris, an extra prayer, Mincha, and Ne'ilah. So they are gathering together and they're standing in prayer, in begging, in petition to Hashem, in reading the Torah. That is all called Maimon. And what would they read? And the Rambam goes through the different passages of creation of the world. On the first day, they read the first day and the second day of creation. On the second day, they would read the second day and third day of creation. On the third day, and so on and so forth. Basically, they needed always 2 paragraphs in order to come up with the 9 needed verses in order to have 3 people called up to the Torah. So ultimately, they read the creation of the world with regard to on the days of their Maimon, on the days of their being in the Beis Hamikdash, or doing these extra prayers for that week. So the yes.
Alkali says it's Mamad is a deputation, so it's men of that were deputized to do something.
I guess that's a modern Hebrew dictionary, yeah.
Yeah,
that's the I don't know if that fits with giving money for the upkeep of.
No, I'm saying on Shema Ahmad, that's what the definition is, not what you're talking about. No.
Yeah, no, maybe that fits with this. Maybe because they were deputies, like, I don't know, would that be like representatives of the community? Could that so maybe yeah. So I wonder if it came from this. I think initially the word probably was because they stood on their sacrifice, but maybe it developed into the word Maimud, meaning like deputization, men of deputies. But anyway, well, either way, maybe okay. So maybe that's maybe we should translate it that way. I don't know if that's the original meaning in the Mishnah, but okay, Shkayach, thank you for mentioning that. Now the Rambam just continues, and he says that the big portion they would call 2 people up for the Torah because you had enough verses for that. In the small portion, you would call 1 person up for the Torah, and then they would read at Mincha. They would just do it by heart. On Chanukah, they didn't have Maimud during the Shachris prayer. And any day that they have Musaf, they would not have Maimud, not in the extra prayer and not at Mincha, only in Shachris and Ne'ilah. And any day that they did the Karban Eitzim, so they didn't have Maimud in Ne'ilah, only at Shachris, the extra prayer and in Mincha. So basically, some days there was too much going on, so they didn't do these extra maimads, which seemingly includes both, according to the Rambam, it includes both the reading of the Torah and the prayers. He's in the earlier paragraph. It seems like he's including them all of these parts of the Maimad, the prayer, petitioning, and reading in the Torah. They're all part of the Maimad. So the Maimad sometimes was canceled. Seemingly, it means all of that stuff was canceled for those specific prayers. And then the Rambam talks about the Karban Eitzim, and he says it was certain families had a fixed time on which they would go out to the forests and bring wood for the arrangement on the altar. And on the day that's designated for this family to bring their sacrifices, they would bring voluntary burnt offerings. And this was called the sacrifice of the wood because they would bring these sacrifices with their donation of wood. So they would bring, so this was their designated day for bringing the wood, and they would also bring these extra sacrifices. And this was called the sacrifice. It was like a festival for these families, and they were forbidden to hesped, to eulogize, to fast, to do work. And this was a custom, davar zeh minhag. And the Rambam continues, says, even an individual that donates wood or logs for the arrangement on the altar is forbidden on that day to do a hesped, eulogize, to fast, to do work, and this is a minhag. So it seems like it developed into a rule that people, if anyone also wanted to just donate wood, they would make that day sort of like a holiday for them, for that person. Now the Rambam finishes off here, and he says in his last paragraph of this chapter, he says the people of the Maimad, they are prohibited to cut their hair or launder their clothes during the week. But on Thursday, they would be permitted because to honor the Shabbos. And why are they prohibited the rest of the week? Because we don't want them entering Maimad while they are unkept. And instead, they would have their hair cut and their clothes laundered beforehand. Okay, so that's basically the Rambam's summary of our Mishnah. That's the Rambam in his book of laws, and it gives us a little understanding, at least the practical side of what our Mishnah is talking about, and especially because we are not familiar with these type of things. These are foreign because we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, and we don't have these ma'amades, and the Mishnah is also like very vague in certain things. So we're going to now start the Mishnah again. This is the final chapter of Taanis, and we're going to start. It's called the Shloisha Prakim, and now we're going to start the Mishnah one more time, and I'm going to do it inside. So we're on page 26a, and we are 7 lines from the top of the page. If you're in the art scroll, 26a, I'm guessing 2, but let's see, 26a, 26a2. Okay, top of the page. So the Mishnah says, B'shleisha prakim, 3 times b'shana in the year, the koyanim noisen es kapeim. The koyanim lift their palms, and that means they do the blessing of the koyanim. 3 times of the year, they do the blessing of the koyanim 4 times a day. So when are these? When do we're not familiar with this? We're used to having the koyanim just bless the people once, but there are 3 times in the year where the koyanim would do the berchas koyanim 4 times during the day, and when what are the four prayers? What are these four prayers that they would do it at? They would do it at Shachris, at Musaf, at Mincha, and at Ne'ilas Sha'arim. Now, the simple meaning, of course, is Shachris is the morning prayer. Musaf would be the Musaf prayer. Mincha is what we know as Mincha, and Ne'ilas Sha'arim is called Ne'ilah, which we do on Yom Kippur. However, the Rambam we saw called Musaf does not mean regular Musaf. It means an extra prayer that was added on the Ma'amadis. It's not the regular Musaf. Now, the three times when they do these four duchenings, which we'll call, it's called when the Kohanim bless the people, it's called duchen, because they would stand on a platform. So the platform was called the duchen. So we call it the Kohanim duchen. So these Kohanim would duchen these four times in one day. When? Taanis on fast days, uva ma'amados on the Maimed, in other words, the week where those individuals who are representing the rest of Klal Yisrael, when they were gathered together, the ma'amados, when they were having their week of special prayers and so on, and uva Yom HaKippurim and on Yom Kippur. So all of these three times you had up to four duchenings in one day. And again, the Gemara, why do I say up to four? Because the Gemara will clarify that not every day was there a tfilas musaf. You didn't always have musaf. And therefore, the Mishnah that says the four times a day, it doesn't mean that they would actually do it always four times on these days. It means that it was up to four times you could do it. And when was it definitely four times? On Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur had the Musaf and so on, and they had the Ne'ilah. However, the other days, now keep in mind, the fast days that we are mostly familiar with, like Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av and Asar B'Teves and Tzom Gedalia. These fast days are not what our Mishnah is talking about, because these fast days are connected more they're connected to Avelos, mourning over the temple. The fast days that we're talking about are prayers for rain, prayers for rain, which we've spoken about much of this tractate. These type of prayers during those days, that is when they would do Ne'ilah. Our fast days, we don't do Ne'ilah, only on Yom Kippur. But those fast days, they would do Ne'ilah, and therefore there was Nesias Kapayim. They would do the at least according to the Mishnah, the opinion of the Mishnah is that they would do Nesias Kapayim. They would lift their palms, meaning they would duchen four times or three times or two times, basically as many times as that day had prayers. There's a big discussion in the commentaries and even in the Gemara Yushalmi, like when exactly was Ne'ilah supposed to be? When did they daven Ne'ilah? So they see from our Mishnah, sounds like it's Bayoim, that Ne'ilah is really supposed to be by day. It's a little hint in the Mishnah. In other words, when are you really supposed to daven Ne'ilah? It seems to be somewhat of a discussion as well with regard to the prayer of Ne'ilah. What does Ne'ilah really refer to? Does Ne'ilah refer to the closing of the gates of the Beis Hamikdash, or is it the closing of the gates of heaven? And if it's the closing of the gates of the Beis Hamikdash, that was more during the day. The closing the gates of heaven, that would be at night. So anyway, this is our Mishnah says four times during the day. It's interesting that it does mention Ne'ilah here as part of the day. In other words, it uses the term day and it still mentions Ne'ilah. So it is a little of a discussion about that. Now, the Mishnah continues. So we have, let's just clarify what we did so far. We have that there is duchening when? Up to four times a day on certain special days. What are these special days? Taanis, Ma'amodos, and Yom Kippur. Again, the Taanis was the fast days for rain. Doesn't say clearly which fast days for rain. Is it the first three? Is it the second three? Is it the final seven? But that is a discussion in the commentaries. Which fast days did they do Ne'ilah? And they would do Nesias Kapayim. They would lift their palms. But definitely there were fast days for rain that they would do these duchenings on extra times, and they would even do Ne'ilah. And Ma'amados is these special days that a group of people were in charge. They were chosen to lead the community, which the Mishnah will now tell us a little about. They would be the representatives. And on Yom Kippur as well, these are days when officially there was Nesius Kapayim on all the prayers of the day. Now, the Mishnah continues and says, Elu hein ma'amadis, these are the ma'amadis. And the Mishnah explains, since it says Tzavas B'nai Yisrael, command the Jewish people, which means there's a commandment for everyone, not just to one individual, not to Moshe. This is for the B'nai Yisrael. It's a communal obligation. Every person is included. Es karbonei lachmi, my sacrifice, that you should bring this daily sacrifice, a lamb in the morning and a lamb in the afternoon. And the Mishnah continues and says, based in the Sifri, it says it's based on the word tishmeru lahakriv li b'mayado. It says tishmeru, they should watch. So based on that word, the understanding is that the person who brings his sacrifice is supposed to watch his sacrifice. So it says, the Mishnah doesn't mention the Sifri. It just throws out the idea from it, which is, how is it possible that a person's korban will be brought and he's not standing on top of it? How could you have such a thing that a person says, Hashem commands the B'nai Yisrael, tells Moshe to command the B'nai Yisrael that what? Bring this korban, which is this daily tamid, this daily burnt offering. And how could you have such a thing if the person is not standing on top of it? And again, that's based on a verse. The pasuk says tishmeru, they should keep it and they should watch it. And it means that we're supposed to watch our korban being sacrificed. We're supposed to be standing there. And how do you do that when you have the entire Jewish people, which would be impossible for them all to stand and be there while the sacrifice is being brought? So the answer is that that Hiskino Nevi'im, Rishonim, the earlier prophets, and I mentioned Shmuel and David, they established Esrim Biarba Mishmaros. There should be 24 Mishmaros. I'll call Mishmar Mishmar Hayamaimad Biyushalayim Shal Kainim Shalavim Shal Yisraelim. On every Mishmar, there was a group in Yerushalayim, a Maimad of a group of these people in Yerushalayim of Kainim, Levim, and Yisraelim. Now, one of the questions that you could ask is, didn't the Jewish people go to the Beis Hamikdash 3 times a year, and there was place for everyone to bow down? So, if there was always space for everyone to bow down, so why is it impossible for people to come to the Beis Hamikdash when we bring the sacrifices? We wouldn't be able to fit. Why not? We fit there when during the holidays. So so it could be that Hashem makes a special miracle during the holidays, but we don't know that that miracle will happen during the year. That's what seemingly the Rambam holds, because the Rambam in his what we just saw, I don't know where I put it, the Rambam seems to imply that in that first in that paragraph that we just read, that he says, impossible for the sacrifice for people and the carbon every yid has to be there. And efshar, it's impossible for every yid to stand in the Azar at the time of the carbon. Seemingly, he's saying it wouldn't work. We wouldn't be able to fit. Now, why wouldn't we be able to fit? I guess because maybe for the holidays we have a miracle, but who says that miracle would work all year, every day? But other commentaries mention another point, and that is, imagine if you had to go to Yerushalayim every time they brought the daily sacrifice. You'd be traveling there in the morning. You'd be traveling there in the evening, in the afternoon. So every day you'd be stuck going to Yerushalayim. So who would gather in the grain? Who would go to work? We'd be traveling back and forth. And it says, V'yasafta de ganecha, you're supposed to gather in your grain. So obviously, that's not the meaning. In other words, obviously, Hashem doesn't expect us to travel there every single day because the Shema tells us V'yasafta de ganecha. Now, another point would also be that it does say 3 times a year, you're all supposed to appear before me. Now, if we had to come there every single day, so then what would be the meaning of the 3 times a year? You should appear before me. Every single day we should appear before Hashem. So obviously, Hashem doesn't expect us to come there every single day. Now, both of these reasons that I just mentioned, the source is the Yerushalmi, the Gemara Yerushalmi basically says this, but it says both of these reasons, that it's impossible to mean that we're expected to come to the Beis HaMikdash every time there's a burnt off, every time they brought the daily offering. So the understanding is that the prophets established 24 groups. Now the groups that the prophets established, the question is, there is a source for these groups in the Torah. It's not totally that the prophets established this, because there are verses in the Torah that seem to imply that there was some type of a organized, there was some type of a plan of how people, how the Kohanim would have their times in the Beis HaMikdash. In fact, there's a verse, Levad mimkarav al ha'avos, which is I think it's in Parsha Shoftim. Let me just see, where is that pasuk? Levad mimkarav al ha'avos, which basically hints to the fact that the Kohanim had their times. Devarim Yud Ches. It's in Devarim 18. And in Devarim 18, Parsha Shoftim, and it says over here, Devarim Yud Ches, Chelek kechelek yechedu. That they would divide the stuff between the Kohanim, except that which was divided into the watches, which was established by the Avos, by the ancestors. In other words, they should eat. Let me read the translation here. They should eat equal portions of the hides and meat of the festival offerings, except for the Talmud offering and the additional offering of Shabbos and voluntary offerings, for which the priests were divided into watches whose rights were sold by their ancestors, meaning it was all established already earlier that you don't, when you go there for the festivals, all the Kohanim are able to partake in the festival sacrifices, besides for the stuff that's not festival or based. It's regular sacrifices, those you can't partake in, because that's divided up by the avos, by the levadmim karav ala avos. That was sold, so to speak, by the ancestors. Meaning, in the Torah itself, it already tells us that there is a mitzvah or some type of a command to divide up the regular daily and weekly sacrifices, and only with regard to the holiday stuff, that is when everyone can have a portion, all the kohanim can partake of it. So they would all join and help out. So anything that was not part of the holiday, the regular weekly stuff or the daily sacrifices, the donation sacrifices, all those was set. In other words, that's not up for anyone to come and partake of. So it sounds like in the Torah itself, it already has some type of established ruling about the division. So what this means is that the Nevi'im Harishonim, the earlier prophets, they established 24 groups. But even before David and Shmuel, there was groups, not 24. They had divided it, however many kainim there were. You have to, in the Gemara, we'll talk about Moshe dividing it, and it seems like there's a contradiction of Bryce's the Gemara will bring about how many groups were there initially. Were there 8 groups or 16 groups? But there were not 24. So the 24 groups are the Takanas Harishonim. But the idea of dividing it into groups is already really in the Chumash. The idea that it has to be divided, that's going to be divided into mishmaros, is not something new. It is basically a pasuk in Chumash. And the reason why there has to be groups is because if everyone's in charge of everything, nothing will get done. And if you divide it up, you're in charge of this, you're in charge of that week, you're in charge of the other week, so then things will actually get done. Now, the Mishnah continues and it says, V'al kol mishmaru mishmar hayamaimed b'Yushalayim shel kohanim shel Levim shel Yisrael. And every mishmar, there was maimed in Yerushalayim of kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim. And basically they were all divided into 24 groups. You had of course, the kohanim were the main ones doing the service, but then the Levim were doing the song, and the Yisraelim were standing on their sacrifices. Now, from this, it sounds like the Ma'amadais included kohanim and Levim. Right? That's what it sounds like. Every mishmar. In fact, if you want to read it very literally, it sounds like for every mishmar of kohanim, there was a maimed that had kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim. So it sounds like maybe it's even saying that for every mishmar that you had kohanim who did their service, and you had Levim who did their service. In addition to that, you also had a maimed of representatives of kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim in Yerushalayim that would just stand on the carpet. That would be like a very literal way of reading the Mishnah. Now, seemingly Rashi over here Rashi seems to be of that understanding that in the Ma'amades there were kohanim and Levim. Now other Rishonim disagree and they say it was only Yisraelim in the Maimed, and doesn't exactly mean that the kohanim and Levim were part of the Maimed, but rather they were there in Yerushalayim together with the Maimed of Yisraelim, of Israelites. But the understanding, if you want to, I mean, it's a little vague. It's not so clear in Rashi either, but that's what it seems like he's saying. He says on every mishmar, the 24 mishmaros of kohanim, on those mishmaros, which Shmuel and David were masakin, on every mishmar, there was a maimed in Yerushalayim. And the Mishnah had said that the Maimed of Yerushalayim had Kainim, Leviim, and Yisraelim, which would mean that the Kainim, Leviim, and Yisraelim were like representatives of the entire Jewish people to stand on the Karban. And that group of representatives could have also included Kainim and Leviim. And in addition to that, of course, you had the Kainim who did the work. But these were the Kainim that were more just standing. They were the representatives. These were this was the Maimed. The other Rishonim don't agree with that. So again, it's a machlokes Rishonim. It's an argument among the commentaries. If the Maimed also included Kainim and Leviim, or was it only Yisraelim? Was it only Israelites? In any event, the Yisraelim it would gather in Yerushalayim and stand on, over their sacrifice, and it was either a concept of type of shlichus, they were like they were sent by their brothers, or it was more of a just being a representative without the law of shlichus. It's a little discussion as well if there's a concept of shlichus here, or was it more just to be standing? They are officially the representatives, but either way, they are representing Klal Yisrael and standing on the Karban, and it's this is considered that the Bnei Yisrael is standing over our Karbanis. In fact, it's a very similar concept when it comes to having a bris. If you've ever heard the moyel makes an announcement at a bris, and he says, Avi haben, what does he say? Avi haben, he would say something like, Oimed al Gabav, Avi haben Oimed al Gabav. The father of the son is standing over here. What does it mean? That just like a person stands on top of his sacrifice, so also the father of the son is standing over his son during the bris, and it's almost like an element of sacrifice, like during the bris. And in fact, there's other comparisons that are just like a sacrifice. You have to wait 8 days till the animal is 8 days old, so the bris is done 8 days old. So it's similar to a sacrifice, and it's Avi haben. I think the term is Oimed al Gabav, but I might be mistaken exactly how they say it. I'm not a moyel. Avi haben al Gabav, maybe. Avi haben. Let me see if it pulls up. Avi haben al Gabav. I don't know. There's some term that the moyel always says. Yeah, I'm not seeing it here, but it's in Shulchan Aruch about this, that the Avi haben stands over there, and he stands over the bris. Anyway, so here also the karbanis, the sacrifices, the representatives would stand on top of by the karban, basically. Now, the time Higiazman HaMishmar Lalas. So when it came time to go to Yerushalayim, Kainim Leviim Oilen Yerushalayim. The Kainim Leviim would go up to Yerushalayim, and the Yisrael Shabbat Mishmar Maskansin LaAreim, and the Israelites would gather in their cities. Now, before we said that the Israelites would go with the Kainim, they would all go to Yerushalayim. It was a Maimed in Yerushalayim. Here we're saying that the time to go to Yerushalayim, the Kainim and Leviim went to Yerushalayim, and everyone else, the Israelites that were part of that Maimed, they would be Miskansin Loireim, they would gather to their cities. So the understanding is that the people who lived in Yerushalayim, they would go to Yerushalayim, and the people who didn't, they would gather in their cities, in their shuls, in their cities. Now, the Rambam seems to have added a little to that idea, and he says not only if you lived in Yerushalayim, but the people lived near Yerushalayim, they would also go to Yerushalayim. Right? That was the understanding of the Rambam, and the people who lived far away. That's what we saw in the Rambam. They would go to their cities, but the ones who lived near Yerushalayim, they would go as well to stand there on their sacrifice, so to speak. Now, so it says the Yidden, the Yisraelim, of that Mishma, Miskansin, Lairem, they gather in their cities. And then it says, what would they do? They would read the Torah portions. Now, they would Miskansin, Lairem, gather in their cities. And a part of their thing, of course, was to daven that their korban, their sacrifice, should be accepted. They would also fast that week. And they would read the Kairin Maaseh Bereshis. They would read the Maaseh Bereshis about creation of the world. Now, why would they read about creation of the world? Because the idea was that if not for sacrifices, the world wouldn't exist. If not for the service of Hashem in the Beis Hamikdash, the whole creation of the world wouldn't be. The world exists because of that. So when we're praying and doing this main service of the Beis Hamikdash, we mention the karbanos on each of those days. They would mention the karbanos a few times. They would read the Torah a few times, and they would say it by heart a few times. So there was an emphasis of creation of the world with regard to the sacrifices and service in the temple. Okay. Now, I should also mention there is a discussion if the fasting that was done, was it also done by the Israelites that were in Yerushalayim, or was it only done by the ones who were doing the prayers and begging Hashem that their sacrifice should be accepted, and they were, they were the reading in the Torah and so on? Was the fasting also only done by the Israelites that were not in Yerushalayim? So it's a discussion. Seemingly a machlekes rishonim. The commentaries argue about that. Okay, then the next paragraph, which I think I mentioned on Friday, is a discussion if it's in parentheses, and the reason it's in parentheses seemingly is because the Gemara has other reasons. So the question is if this was part of the Mishnah, or the fact that the Gemara shows other reasons. Maybe it means that this was not here, or maybe different gersois, different versions. Anyway, the Mishnah says Vanchei Amaimad Hayu Masanen Arba Yamim B'Shavua. They would end up fasting 4 days, Miyam Sheni V'Ad Yom Chamishi, from Monday through Thursday. Erev Shabbos, they wouldn't fast Nekavot Shabbos on Friday because they shouldn't go into Shabbos hungry. Shabbos, they wouldn't fast on Sunday. They shouldn't go from pleasure to suffering and pain, and viyamusu, and the commentaries say it doesn't mean they will die, it means they will get weak. Okay, then it says, what would they read? So they would read in the Torah Maaseh Bereshis, which we said before. What Maaseh Bereshis? So on the first day, they would read day 1 and day 2. B'yam Rishon Bereshis and Yehirakia. They would read Bereshis, and which included Shamayim Va'aretz, and there should be light. Yehirakia, they should be a firmament, the heavens. So that's day 1 and day 2. The Sheni, on the second day, they would read about Yehirakia, the heavens, and also Yikava Amayim, let the waters and the earth be divided so that there's water and there's earth. And so that's on the second day. B'Shlishi, Yikava Amayim Yihima Eirais. On the third day, they would read day 3 and day 4. Yikava Amayim is the waters were set as an ocean, were made into an ocean. The dry land was dry land. Ma'ires, the fourth day was that the luminaries were put in the sky, and so you had the sun, the moon, and the stars. Baravi on the fourth day, Yehi Ma'ires was the sun, the moon, the stars, and the fifth, and they would read for the fifth day. Again, each of the days, it wasn't enough psukim, enough verses for that day, so they would read the day after it. And Yishritzu Amayim, which was really on Thursday, about the fish and the birds. B'chamishi on the fifth day was Yishritzu Amayim and Toitzei Haaretz. On the fifth day, they would read day 5 and day 6, which basically was day 5 was the fish and the birds, and day 6 was the animals and the human. B'shishi Toitzei Haaretz by Yechulu Hashemayim. On the 6th day, they would read the 6th day and the 7th day, which basically was the animals and human, and meaning Adam and Chava, and by Yechulu Hashemayim, which is the 7th day Shabbos, how Hashem finished everything, and Ba Shabbos Ba Menucha, and that was the 7th day. So that was all read on Friday. So all the days, even though they weren't fasting, we see here, even though they weren't fasting, because on Sunday they didn't fast and on Friday they didn't fast, they still read on each of the days these special portions from the Torah. And the Mishnah continues and says, Parsha G'dayla Karanesa B'Shnayim. If it's a big portion, then they were able to divide it into 2 people getting aliyahs, and Katana, and the small portion. In other words, if it had less than 6 verses or less than 5 verses, so because we'll see in the Gemara how that worked. But if it's a small portion, b'yachid, they would only give 1 aliyah. It was only 1 person was called up for that portion. So that was the way it was divided in what was read. Now, b'shachris, when it came to shachris, so they would read the Torah, and b'musaf, and by musaf, they would also read the Torah, either a day that had musaf, or according to the Rambam, they added a prayer during these days. So that was what it meant, that musaf means an additional prayer. It doesn't necessarily mean musaf, but means when the extra prayer that was added. So they would also read the Torah. So they would be pulling out the Torah for both in the morning, Shachris, and during Musaf. And over Mincha, by Mincha, it says, by Mincha, Nechnasin v'Keirin al PM, they would not bring out the Torah. Basically, they would enter the base of the shul, and they would read the portion Bal Peh, which means by heart, Al PM, Kekeirin Shema, like they would read the Shema, meaning individually, and that was what was done by Mincha. Interestingly enough, Ne'ilah doesn't seem like they would read it at all. They wouldn't read the portion at all, and could be because they were too overwhelmed after such a hard day of fasting and praying all day, so they didn't read it at all. Now that's one way of understanding this. The Rambam seemingly says that they would read it at Ne'ilah as well by heart. They would still read it by heart. The Rambam in his Perush HaMishnayos seems to hold that in Ne'ilah they would still say it. But Rashi doesn't learn that way. Okay. In any event, so we have a lot of discussion here in commentaries of different, exactly how this was done. And but in any event, the general idea over here is all about the ma'amodos and what the prayers, what they would add. They would have Kriyas HaTorah every day. And even when they didn't fast, like Sunday, they would still do Kriyas HaTorah, and they had 3 people being called up. And the Kriyas HaTorah was not once a day; it was Shachris and Musaf. Mincha, they didn't do the Kriyas HaTorah in public, but they did individually, and they would just say it, without reading it from a Torah. and without, I guess, calling up people. They would just recite it. And Ne'ilah was questionable if they actually, if they even said it then. Possibly yes, possibly depending on the different Rishonim, different the commentaries argue about that. In Erev Shabbos b'mincha lo hayu nechnasim. Now it says Erev Shabbos at mincha they would not come to shul. Not that they didn't come and daven, they would daven mincha, but it means they wouldn't come for this extra stuff to read the parsha and so on. Mipnei kavod Shabbos because of the need to prepare to honor the Shabbos, so they wouldn't do the extras. Erev Shabbos and mincha they wouldn't do this extra, additional stuff like the reading the parsha. Then the Mishnah says that sometimes the Maimad was canceled. And what does it mean the Maimad was canceled? So the Maimad being canceled means either the extra davening part in the gathering together and doing this extra prayers, or it means the Kriyas HaTorah. So some days they didn't do this extra stuff. What days? Kol Yom Sheish by Hallel, a day that they have Hallel, which means the full Hallel, not a half Hallel. It means the full Hallel, like Hanukkah. So we have Hallel. So in by Maimed Shachris, you're not going to have the Maimed of Shachris because they're going to read the Hallel. But they would have the Maimed at Mincha and at Ne'ilah. They would still do these extra prayers at Mincha and Ne'ilah. They just wouldn't do it they wouldn't do it at Shachris. Now, there is a discussion here, and that's adds a little complication here, which basically is, who are we referring to when it says when there's Hallel, they would not do the Maimed of Shachris. They wouldn't do this extra stuff on Shachris. The Rashi, the way Rashi says it, it's basically the ones in Yerushalayim, people in Yerushalayim, they were too busy because they had to do the Ketores, they had to stand there for the other parts of the Ivarim, the limbs of the daily sacrifice, and basically if they're going to say Hallel, they didn't have time to do the Maimed, and therefore the Maimed was basically canceled. But the people outside of Yerushalayim, they would say Hallel and do the Maimed as well. In other words, it's only the ones in Yerushalayim that it was canceled from. If you look in Rashi, Rashi says, those that were in Yerushalayim, they wouldn't daven, they wouldn't be doing these extra prayers because they had to say Hallel on a day that there was Hallel because they don't have time, and so they would cancel it from the Shachris. Okay, so they canceled it from the Shachris prayer, and again, there's a machlokes here. The Rashi learns this way, but other commentaries say clearly that it's the ones outside Yerushalayim also canceled it, but Rashi doesn't seem to learn that way. Now, the next thing the Mishnah says is Karban Musaf, that a day that there's Musaf, which is like Rosh Chodesh, so that day, Ein b'ne'ilah. You do not have a maimed for ne'ilah, which means also for ne'ilah, because they're too busy with these extra sacrifices that they would bring for the carbon musaf. So if so, they would not have in ne'ilah a maimed, and for sure they wouldn't have in mincha because they're busy with the musaf. And it would be doiche, would push off also the ne'ilah maimed. And even the Israelites, they also wouldn't do their prayers. In other words, these people are busy doing the sacrifice, but even the Israelites, they would be busy chopping the wood for the. Rashi brings down this. They would chop the wood and draw water, and therefore they were too busy because they needed to burn more sacrifices. They needed to chop more wood, and they didn't have time to do this extra stuff in Ne'ilah, and for sure they wouldn't do it in Mincha, which is right near the right near the right near when they would do the Musaf sacrifice. Now, Taisus over here says that a day that they did Musaf, they would not even say Ne'ilah. But the other commentaries don't seem to agree with that. In other words, Taisus seems to hold you don't even say Ne'ilah. But that's the second to last Taisus on the page. But the other commentaries seem to just say there wasn't maimed. They didn't do the extra prayers for Ne'ilah. Now, the next thing is Karban Eitzim, a day that was part of these special days that they would bring, that the people had their holidays, which we just read about in the Rambam. Karban Eitzim, the days, special days, 9 days in the year that certain families made a special holiday. They would bring extra sacrifices and so on, and voluntary sacrifices. So those days, ein b'mincha. They did not do maimed at mincha. And the reason is because they were bringing a sacrifice of the eitzim. They were makriv of the carbon eitzim near mincha time, and they wouldn't do a maimed at mincha time. And these are the words of Rabbi Akiva. And Ben Azai argued, and then Rabbi Akiva agreed with Ben Azai. We'll see in the end. What did Ben Azai hold? Ben Azai kacha Rabbi Yeshua Shreiner. The following is how Rabbi Yeshua learned it. Karban Musaf, if there's a Musaf, then a day that there's Musaf, so we said before there's no that you don't have in Ne'ilah, and you also don't have in Mincha. But Ben Azai says no. Karban Musaf ein b'mincha. You don't do it mincha the ma'amadis, and then you also wouldn't do in Musaf the ma'amadis, but you would do in Shachris and in Ilah. That would be the that's the understanding of Ben Azai, that you would do in Shachris and in Ilah. You wouldn't do it if there's Karban Musaf. Then you also don't do in Mincha, and including in Musaf, of course. Now Karban Eitzim, when you would bring the Eitzim, when you would bring the woods, that special holiday, ein b'ne'ilah, you would not do the ma'amadis. You wouldn't do these extra prayers at mincha. I'm sorry, you wouldn't do it ne'ilah, but you would do it mincha. So that's the way he. In other words, the previous opinion said you didn't do it mincha, but he says, Ben Azai says the way Rabbi Yeshua learned was you wouldn't do ne'ilah, but you would do at mincha. And we'll see in the Gemara about this. This is going to be discussed. The Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva changed his mind and he learned like Ben Azai. The time of the Atei Kayanim and the so there were 9 of them. Tisha, there were 9 of the, in other words, the times that they set aside for this holiday. Again, it was the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, and the people, they didn't have wood, and people donated, And so there were 9 of these days, and it goes through the list. Echad ben Nisan is Bnei Yarach ben Yehuda. This was a family from the tribe of Yehuda, and they brought it Echad ben Nisan, and then Basar Matamos, Bnei David ben Yehuda was the family of David ben Yehuda, also from the tribe of Yehuda, and they donated 20th of Tammuz, Chamisha Ba'av. The 5th of Av is Bnei Parish ben Yehuda. Shiva Boy is Bnei Yonadav ben Rechav. On the 7th day was Yonadav ben Rechav, 7th of Av. Ba'asara Boy on the 10th day Bnei Sana ben Binyamin. He was from the Shevet of Binyamin, and Bachamisha Asar Boy on the 15th day of Av. Learn about Bnei Zatu ben Yehuda, and this seems to be a small family because it says V'imahem, together with them was the Kohanim and Leviim. That together with them gathered Kohanim and Leviim, and the Kol Misha Tov Shifta, anyone who didn't know which family he was part of, that was, although they were part of the people who donated, but they didn't know which family they were from. Ubnei Goinvei Eli, Ubnei Koitze Katziyos, all of these families joined the holiday of the 15th of Av, of the donation of the wood, and they joined Bnei Zatu ben Yehuda, seemingly because his family was a smaller family, and there was room for many more people to join. Okay, it looks like my time is up. We're going to continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem. Sei gesund, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.